Most men don't wake up one morning and decide to become a low-value man. It happens quietly, gradually, through habits, thoughts, and compromises that feel harmless in the moment. That's why this conversation matters. Not to shame, but to confront. Because the earlier a man recognizes the warning signs, the faster he can reverse course. Low value is not an identity. It is a condition, and like any condition rooted in psychology and behavior, it can be treated once you stop lying to yourself. The first and most dangerous sign is a lack of self-confidence disguised as being realistic. This is the man who constantly doubts his own judgment, hesitates before speaking, second-guesses every decision, and looks to others for permission to act. He feels inferior in rooms where no one has declared him so. He watches other men, especially the curated versions online, and quietly concludes that he is behind, less capable, or not enough. Over time, this internal narrative becomes his reality. In dating and social life, this shows up as hesitation. He waits too long to make a move, overthinks texts, waters down his opinions, and fears rejection more than regret. In work and purpose, it appears as procrastination, unfinished goals, and a chronic sense that he's not ready yet. Confidence doesn't disappear overnight. It erodes through avoidance. Each time a man chooses comfort over action, his belief in himself weakens psychologically. This kind of self-doubt often comes from external comparison. When a man measures his worth against other men's highlight reels, he loses touch with his own progress. He stops tracking internal wins and starts chasing validation. The problem is that validation never builds confidence. It temporarily numbs insecurity, then leaves it stronger than before. Real confidence is not arrogance or bravado. It is trust in your ability to figure things out. And that trust is built through evidence. Small promises kept to yourself. Difficult conversations handled instead of avoided. Discomfort entered voluntarily and survived. The man who rebuilds his confidence does not wait to feel ready. He acts while uncertain and lets the results educate him. Self-talk matters here more than motivation. The internal language of a low-value man is apologetic, self-critical, and defensive. The shift begins when a man speaks to himself like a leader instead of a critic. Progress over perfection, action over approval, internal metrics over external applause. But confidence alone does not exist in a vacuum. Even when a man starts changing internally, the world still responds first to what it can see. And this is where many men unknowingly sabotage their progress. By neglecting the physical signals that communicate self-respect before a single word is spoken, that's where the next warning sign quietly enters the picture. Confidence may begin internally, but it is judged externally long before anyone hears your story. This leads us to the second sign of a man sliding into low value, neglecting his appearance and self-care. This is not about vanity. It is about signals. Human beings are biologically wired to read cues of discipline, health, and self-respect within seconds. When a man stops caring how he presents himself, the world doesn't interpret it as humility. It reads it as resignation. Many men tell themselves that looks don't matter, or that focusing on grooming and fitness is superficial. In reality, this belief is often a defense mechanism. It protects the ego from confronting effort. When a man lets his body decline, ignores his health, dresses without intention, or walks through life unkempt, He communicates something powerful: he has stopped investing in himself. And others respond accordingly, whether consciously or not. In dating, this neglect sends a clear message. Women don't see a man who is too deep to care about appearances. They see a man who lacks structure and self-discipline. Attraction is not built on words or potential. It is built on energy, presence, and consistency. Physical self-care is one of the most basic ways a man demonstrates that he can lead himself. If he cannot manage his own body, how can he manage challenges, emotions, or responsibility? This decline often begins after small victories. A man gets comfortable in a relationship, lands a job, or reaches a temporary milestone, then slowly stops trying. The gym visits fade. The mirror becomes something he avoids rather than checks. Meals become reactive instead of intentional. Over time, this physical neglect feeds back into psychology. Low energy creates low motivation. Low motivation reinforces low self-esteem. The cycle tightens. Reversing this is not about extremes or perfection. It starts with structure. A consistent grooming routine, movement every day, not when motivation appears, eating in a way that supports clarity and strength instead of comfort and escape. Clothing chosen with purpose, not trend chasing, but alignment with the man you are becoming. These actions rebuild internal pride quietly, without needing praise. When a man respects himself physically, others feel it before he speaks. His posture changes. His eye contact steadies. His presence becomes grounded. This is not because muscles create value, but because discipline does. And discipline is attractive in every domain of a life. Yet even a disciplined, well-presented man can collapse his value instantly if his emotional center is unstable. Many men improve their bodies, but remain psychologically desperate, especially in their interactions with women. This desperation doesn't come from lack of options alone, but from a deeper internal scarcity that governs how he connects. And that scarcity is the third warning sign. A man can be fit, well-dressed, and still deeply unattractive if his emotional energy comes from need rather than choice. This brings us to the third sign of a low-value man: a scarcity mindset around women and relationships. This is the man who chases validation instead of connection, who clings to attention, and who quietly fears being alone more than being disrespected. His actions may look romantic on the surface, but underneath, they are driven by anxiety. Scarcity shows up in subtle ways. Overinvesting too early, constantly checking messages, changing opinions to maintain approval, obsessing over one woman while ignoring his own life. When a man believes his happiness depends on someone else choosing him, he gives away his power. Women sense this immediately, not through logic, but through emotional tone. Neediness creates pressure, and pressure kills attraction, psychologically. This mindset is rooted in a belief that options are rare, that love, sex, or connection are scarce resources to be secured rather than experiences to be chosen. Often, this belief comes from past rejection, limited social exposure, or consuming narratives that position women as gatekeepers of worth. The result is a man who either over-pursues or withdraws entirely, both driven by fear rather than confidence. The tragedy of scarcity is that it creates the very outcome a man is trying to avoid. The more he seeks validation, the less respected he becomes. The more he fears loss, the more likely loss becomes. This is not because women are cruel, but because attraction requires emotional freedom. Desire grows when two whole individuals choose each other, not when one tries to be chosen. An abundant man does not mean a man with endless options. It means a man who knows he will be fine regardless of any single outcome. His life is full. His purpose does not pause for texts. His self-worth is not negotiated through attention. When he connects with a woman, it is from curiosity and desire, not desperation. This emotional detachment is not coldness. It is self-respect. Shifting out of scarcity begins with recentering your life around growth rather than approval. Expanding your social world. Developing skills and interests that create fulfillment independent of relationships. Practicing restraint instead of reaction. Learning to sit with discomfort without rushing to soothe it through external validation. Over time, the nervous system learns that being alone is not a threat, and neediness dissolves. But abundance in relationships is impossible without direction in life. A man with no clear path will unconsciously look to others to give him meaning. This is why the fourth sign of low value is not about women at all, but about ambition, purpose, and the quiet danger of drifting through life without a mission. When a man has no direction, everything else in his life begins to wobble. This is the fourth sign of a low-value man, a lack of ambition, purpose, or long-term vision. He wakes up, reacts to the day, and goes to sleep without feeling that he is moving toward anything meaningful. Life happens to him instead of being shaped by him. Over time, this passive existence erodes self-respect from the inside out. A man without purpose often confuses comfort with peace. He avoids discomfort, delays responsibility, and tells himself that things will work out eventually. But deep down, he feels restless, irritable, and unsatisfied. This internal tension often leaks into relationships. He becomes overly dependent on a partner for motivation, identity, or emotional stability. When that relationship falters, he collapses because he has nothing solid beneath him. Ambition is not about money or status alone. It is about movement, growth, a willingness to struggle towards something that matters. Women are not attracted to a man's bank account as much as they are drawn to his trajectory. A man going somewhere creates a sense of direction and safety. A man standing still, complaining about circumstances, or blaming the world for his stagnation creates uncertainty and drain. Psychologically, drifting is a form of avoidance. It allows a man to escape the fear of failure by never fully committing. If he never tries, he never has to confront his limits. But this avoidance comes at a cost. The longer a man delays responsibility, the heavier it becomes. Opportunities pass. Confidence decays. Resentment builds, often disguised as cynicism. Reclaiming ambition begins with honesty, admitting that coasting is no longer acceptable, defining personal values instead of borrowing goals from others. A mission does not need to be grand, but it must be real. Something that requires effort, learning, and consistency. When a man commits to a path, even imperfectly, his posture changes, his energy sharpens, his decisions simplify. Discomfort becomes an ally instead of an enemy. Challenges turn into feedback instead of proof of inadequacy. Life becomes a series of problems to solve rather than burdens to avoid. This mindset shift alone elevates a man's presence in every area of life, including dating, work, and self-respect. However, purpose without emotional control can still lead a man into low-value behavior. Ambitious men who lack emotional intelligence often sabotage themselves through impulsive reactions, resentment, or inability to handle criticism. This is why the fifth sign is not about drive, but about emotional mastery, the skill that determines whether a man's strength builds or destroys his life. A man can be disciplined, driven, and still quietly lose respect if he lacks emotional control. This is the fifth sign of a low-value man: poor emotional regulation and low emotional intelligence. This is not about suppressing feelings or pretending to be unbothered. It is about how a man processes emotion, responds under pressure, and handles discomfort without turning it into chaos. Men with low emotional control react instead of respond. They explode in anger, shut down in silence, or spiral into defensiveness when challenged. Criticism feels like an attack on their identity. Rejection becomes personal humiliation. Disagreement turns into resentment. Over time, people learn to walk on eggshells around them, or they disengage completely. Not because the man is evil, but because he is emotionally unsafe. In relationships, this trait is especially damaging. A man who cannot regulate his emotions often swings between people-pleasing and bitterness. He may overgive, suppress his needs, then erupt when he feels unappreciated, or he may become cold and dismissive, using emotional distance as protection. In both cases, the issue is the same. He has not learned to sit with emotion without letting it control his behavior. Psychologically, low emotional intelligence is often rooted in avoidance. Avoidance of vulnerability, avoidance of accountability, avoidance of self-reflection. Many men were never taught how to identify what they feel, let alone communicate it with clarity and restraint. So emotions come out sideways, through sarcasm, withdrawal, passive aggression, or self-sabotage. High-value men are not emotionless. They are emotionally literate. They notice what they feel without being owned by it. They listen more than they react. They can hold discomfort without rushing to escape it. This ability creates trust. Others feel heard, respected, and grounded around them. Emotional stability becomes a form of quiet leadership. Developing this skill starts internally, slowing down reactions, creating space between stimulus and response, practicing awareness instead of judgment. When emotions arise, the goal is not to eliminate them, but to understand them. What is this feeling pointing to fear? Insecurity, unmet expectations, fatigue. Once a man can name what he feels, he regains choice over how he acts. Discipline plays a role here as well. Sleep, physical training, solitude, and reflection all strengthen emotional regulation. So does accepting feedback without turning it into self-attack or external blame. Growth requires humility, and humility requires emotional maturity. Yet even emotionally aware men can fall into another trap that quietly drains their value, forming relationships that are unbalanced, transactional, or one-sided. When a man forgets his boundaries or turns connection into a covert exchange, respect erodes slowly but surely. That is the sixth sign, and it often hides behind the mask of being nice or giving. The sixth sign of a low-value man is subtle because it often disguises itself as kindness, loyalty, or emotional depth. It is being transactional or allowing relationships to become one-sided. This is the man who gives without boundaries and then silently keeps score. He listens endlessly, supports constantly, and sacrifices himself, all while hoping it will eventually be rewarded with affection, loyalty, or validation. when that reward doesn't come. Bitterness replaces generosity. Transactional thinking turns human connection into a covert contract. I give you my time, my attention, my emotional labor, so you owe me something in return. The problem is that unspoken contracts are always broken when a man operates this way. He positions himself as a utility rather than a partner. He becomes useful, not desired, needed, not chosen. And over time, his self-respect erodes because he is abandoning his own needs to maintain proximity to others. This pattern often comes from past wounds or scarcity. A man who fears loss may overinvest to secure connection. A man who doubts his worth may believe he must earn love through service. In both cases, the behavior is rooted in insecurity, not generosity. True giving comes from abundance, not fear. When giving is driven by fear, it creates imbalance, and imbalance always leads to resentment. In romantic relationships, this shows up as being the emotional dumping ground, the fixer, or the constant initiator. He gives attention without receiving effort. He compromises his standards to avoid conflict. He stays quiet to keep the peace. Eventually, he feels unseen and unappreciated. But instead of setting boundaries, he internalizes the frustration or explodes unexpectedly. Both outcomes damage respect. High-value men understand reciprocity, not as a rigid exchange, but as a shared rhythm. Energy flows both ways. Effort is mutual. Respect is non-negotiable. They are willing to walk away from dynamics that require self-betrayal to maintain. This does not make them cold or selfish. It makes them grounded. Boundaries are not walls. They are filters. Rebuilding this area requires a shift from approval-seeking to self-respect. Asking honest questions before giving, am I offering this freely? Or am I hoping it will make me valued? Am I ignoring my own needs to avoid discomfort when a man chooses himself without apology? His relationships either recalibrate or fall away. Both outcomes are wins. But even with strong boundaries and healthier relationships, a man can still sabotage his growth if he refuses to take responsibility for his life. When blame replaces accountability, evolution stops. This final sign is the most dangerous of all, because it locks a man into stagnation while convincing him it's not his fault. The seventh and final sign of a low-value man is the refusal to take responsibility for his life. This is the man who explains instead of improves, who blames instead of adapts, and who wears victimhood as a shield against growth. Nothing is ever his fault. The system is against him. Women are the problem. Circumstances are unfair. And while some of these things may contain partial truth, they become excuses when they replace action. Avoiding responsibility feels comforting in the short term. It protects the ego from shame and failure. But psychologically, it is one of the most destructive habits a man can adopt. When he gives away ownership of his outcomes, he also gives away his power to change them. He becomes reactive, resentful, and stagnant. Over time, this mindset seeps into every area of life, sabotaging relationships, ambition, and self-respect. In dating, this often looks like excessive explaining or defending, justifying behavior instead of correcting it, carrying emotional burdens that are not his, while neglecting his own growth, or the opposite, withdrawing completely and blaming the world for his isolation. In both cases, the core issue is the same. He is focused on what is happening to him rather than what he is doing about it. High-value men operate from internal authority. They ask hard questions. What could I have done differently? Where did I ignore red flags? What habits am I avoiding confronting? This mindset does not involve self-hatred. It involves honesty. Responsibility is not about blaming yourself for everything. It is about recognizing that your responses shape your results. When a man stops blaming, he stops explaining. He no longer needs to convince others of his worth or justify his choices. He lets results speak. He focuses on what he can control and releases what he cannot. Failure becomes feedback. Rejection becomes redirection. Pain becomes fuel instead of an identity. This is the moment where transformation truly begins. Recognizing these 7 signs is not an indictment. It is an awakening. Every man will see parts of himself in this list at some point. The difference is whether he uses that awareness to evolve or to defend his comfort. Becoming a high-value man is not about dominance, money, or external approval. It is about internal alignment, self-respect, discipline, purpose, emotional mastery, boundaries, accountability. When these foundations are in place, attraction becomes a byproduct, not a pursuit. Low value is a phase, not a destiny. And the moment a man chooses growth over comfort, ownership over excuses, and truth over illusion, he begins his rebirth. Choose yourself. Build from honesty. And if you are ready to continue this journey deeper, this channel exists for men who refuse to stay asleep.